In May 1986, an Islington social worker was jailed for 4 years for helping to organise a ring involving young boys and youths. Abraham Jacob, a former schoolmaster and a trainee priest, was arrested as part of Operation Circus, a police operation centred around Piccadilly Circus in London, which lasted 5 months and had over 100 officers working the case. Operation Circus interviewed hundreds of young people, many from care homes. It was coordinated from this station and overseen by this man, Commander Trevor Lloyd Hughes. However, Commander Lloyd Hughes had not been able to see this investigation through to completion, for he had died of a heart attack just over a week before Jacob Abraham was sentenced. On the Sunday following Lloyd Hughes' death, a newspaper claimed that he was under investigation for potential links to what was called a rent boy ring. Could it be possible that this exemplary cop, who the commander of the Metropolitan Police had paid tribute to, was part of the problem for young boys in Piccadilly Circus and not the solution?
Right, on the night in question, I was on duty at Barnet Police Station. There was a telephone call that came into the station office as opposed to the command and control room, which was also at Barnet Police Station. As a consequence of that call, the station officer went to the control room, spoke to the sergeant in there, and a message was put out for the area car crew to attend a local station and call the control room. They were obviously assigned to something. We didn't know what they were assigned to, and off they went. Well, there then was a call for a section sergeant to attend an address, and consequently also a serving chief inspector who was called out from home to also attend this address. At this point, none of us knew what was going on. Later on in the evening, or the early hours of the morning as it was, we got together as a team for sort of morning tea and biscuits at sort of 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and the area car crew relayed to us what had happened at the address. Now, they told us that it had been to an address in Blanche Lane, South Mims, which was the home address of Commander Trevor Lloyd Hughes. The crew detailed to us what they'd found at the scene, and what they told us was that they found Trevor Lloyd Hughes in a chair, fully dressed, in a suit, with a tie, very tightly tied around his neck. There was a note there, and he was surrounded by multiple vials of amyl nitrite. As a consequence of which, the chief inspector and the sergeant attended the scene, that the officers were told to leave the scene, that the amyl nitrite, which they'd started to evidence, and the officer's notebook were both taken off, and they were relieved of possession of those things, and they were told to leave the scene and not to discuss it any further. Now, when we got back the following evening, we known as parade, we went on parade. And then we were taken to another room where there was 2 gentlemen, both wearing suits. One of them didn't speak at all, and then one of them did speak to us. Don't know who he was. I can't even remember whether he was formally identified or not. Now, what we were specifically told was that the events of the evening before were likely to generate considerable media interest, and that under absolutely no circumstances whatsoever were we to speak to the media. We weren't even to speak to our wives and partners, and preferably not to discuss the incident between ourselves. If there were any approaches made by the media, then we were immediately to inform our inspector or the chief inspector, and they would handle it, but we were to make no comment on anything. We were sort of pre-warned that there could be something coming out at the weekend in the press concerning Commander Trevor Lloyd Hughes. During the course of the night, I went into the station office, and back in the day, technology wasn't so advanced, and we had a teleprinter system. Now, every day we would get messages of consequence come over the teleprinter system, events that were going on, any major incidents, things of particular interest, and that was stored in a binder on the station officer's desk, along with something that's called an occurrence book, which is a handwritten book where certain things are put into it, sudden deaths being one of them. So I looked at this telecommunications from the Commissioner, which was, I think it was about 10 a.m. it was actually timed at, in which the Commissioner announced, or he regretted to announce, the death of the highest ranking officer to die in service, that being of Commander Trevor Lloyd Hughes, who died peacefully at home from natural causes, which again was completely contradictory to what we believed may have happened the night before, certainly on the evidence of the officers that attended the scene. Interestingly, The report of the sudden death of Commander Lloyd Hughes was in the occurrence book at Potters Bar Police Station, and it was reported by an officer stationed, I believe, on the community team, or the home beats as they were called then, from there, that attended the venue in the morning to report the sudden death. Now, well, of course, there was no CAD reference of this incident whatsoever prior to that officer being dispatched to the job. So the CAD reference was created as if it had come in after 6 a.m. in the morning. I read the report, and I noted that the officer had said that Commander Lloyd Hughes, he'd been visited, apparently lifeless body, so on and so forth, and that he was in his bed. Now that is completely contradictory to what the officers had said the night before. The fact that he was sitting in a chair, that he was fully clothed, that he'd got tied very tightly round his neck. There was a note and the vials. It was that following weekend I read the article in the newspaper and saw that there was an expose of Commander Lloyd Hughes and his alleged association with rent boys and young people.
Machin is in no doubt that there was a cover-up in place.
I believe it was suicide. And I mean, so did everybody else.
Since Lloyd Hughes' death, Howard Groves, a detective on Operation Circus, has spoken out. He believes that the investigation was fine when arresting people like Jacob Abraham, but not when parliamentarians, who were said to be picking up boys in Piccadilly Circus, were mentioned. Machin's story is backed up to a degree by a man I encountered. He has asked me to hide his identity.
When I was a teenager, I was introduced to a guy, a rather kind of creepy guy, when I was working in a TV studio in North London, and that guy had an interest in two-way radios, and at the time so did I. And he invited me after, some time period had passed, and he invited me to go and look at some radios that he wanted to sell. So I reluctantly went round to his place because he didn't live too far away from where I lived. And he had these Pi radios out on the table, and I walked in and sat down. I was looking at them. We were chatting and everything, having a cup of tea. And after a little while, another guy appeared at the kitchen door, which kind of startled me, and he had a young boy with him. And I didn't say anything at first, and I looked at this Mike Lewis guy, and I said, "Oh, hello," wondering who the hell this guy was and where he'd come from, sort of thing, because we'd been in this guy's apartment for, I don't know, probably 15 minutes or something like that sometime. And I wondered what he'd been doing and who this kid was. So he said, "Oh, this is a friend of mine." And I said, "Do you have a name?" And he said, "Trevor." And I said, "Do you have a last name?" And he said, "Lloyd Hughes." And I said, "Oh, hi," sort of thing. And then I was looking at the boy, and I said, "And who's this?" And Trevor Lloyd Hughes said, "This is Martin." And I remembered his name because I have the same middle name. And then after maybe a few more words, which I can't remember, he said that he has to leave, but he was standing there and he was holding the boy by the arm, not by the hand, which I thought was a bit strange. It was almost like he was kind of reprimanding him or fearful that he might escape somewhere. And he said, "Well, we have to leave," and he disappeared out, and I heard the front door go. And that was it. But the interesting thing was, I have a photographic memory for faces, and I have fairly recently discovered, to my horror, that the boy who was with Trevor Lloyd Hughes that day was Martin Allen, a little boy who, he was probably a year or two younger than me, I should think. Has disappeared and has never been found, and I am 100% certain that was him. And it made the blood in my veins go cold when I saw that, because that suddenly, now that I know more about Trevor and the sort of things that he was into and up to, it really chilled me, and I think I missed the bullet on that occasion.
Martin Allen, a 15-year-old schoolboy, disappeared on Bonfire Night, November the 5th, 1979. He travelled from his London school on the tube with the intention of visiting his older brother in Holloway Road, Islington. After saying goodbye to friends, he headed off for the Piccadilly line at King's Cross. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. He has not been seen since. Over a period of 3 years, Lloyd Hughes, a senior commander at the Met, began grooming Tony, and they spent many hours together. Tony was flattered that a man of Lloyd Hughes' status took such an interest in him.
Yeah, we used to drive around in his car, which was a police vehicle, an unmarked police vehicle, and I don't know how long it was between me first meeting him, but I suppose it couldn't have been that long, because the vehicle that he used was supplied by C11, Criminal Intelligence Branch, and it was the same car that he had, and I used to sit outside. We started to drive down to the Pimlico area, and I didn't know what this place was. It just looked like an enormous, ugly, block of apartments and stuff. And I used to sit outside in the car and read police reviews. He'd disappear for about an hour and stuff like that. And he always told me that he had to go and visit an old friend of his, which may have been the case, I don't know. But knowing now what I know about Trevor and the sort of stuff that he was involved in, and the association with Dolphin Court, it's very difficult not to put two and two together and come up with four. Knowing what happened there, why was Trevor there, what was, there were too many connections as far as I'm concerned. Trevor was into that kind of thing. That was what was going on at that location. It's not really something that I particularly want to go into the exact details, but needless to say, we went round to, I think it was the second or third flat that Lewis owned or had moved into. The place was empty, but he had a key, and we went in, and at that point he got very violent with me. He grabbed hold of me, pushed me into this room, and basically ripped open my shirt. I won't tell you what happened after that, but it was enough for me I just started screaming at him that I would speak to my friend who worked for MI5, and that I would tell him, and that I'd have him thrown out the police. And at that point he stopped, and I just ran out the place, and I can't even remember how I got home, because we arrived there in his car.
In 1986, I worked at the Empire Ballroom in Leicester Square, just 2 minutes walk away from Piccadilly, and during the time of Operation Circus, and we knew the meat rack well. The boys would hang out in these windows ready to be selected. It was seedy, and there was a general sense that these kids were lost. We weren't much older than some of the kids on the meat rack, but our lives couldn't have been more different, really. Me and my friends. All this information on Trevor Lloyd Hughes has been given to police, politicians, and even the Prime Minister Theresa May. No one has done anything. I have worked with other journalists on this, and other police who were there on the night of Lloyd Hughes' death has been traced. They have refused to speak. The culture of silence persists. In 1993, the popular mini-series Prime Suspect aired. Written by Linda LaPlante. This stuff practically writes itself sometimes. Prime Suspect was about a tough female detective for the Metropolitan Police. She was played by Helen Mirren. The storyline was that of a bent senior cop linked to a rent boy ring in Soho, the district of the meat rack. Just as the cop was about to be exposed, he committed suicide. It was based on the Lloyd Hughes story, with research supplied by a senior Metropolitan Police cop.